Welcome to Analytics Nexus. Thanks for joining us for Gary Carlson's presentation, Improving Data Quality Across Your Marketing Systems. Gary Carlson is the principal at Factor. He helps enterprise-level companies boost revenue, increase customer satisfaction, and improve efficiency through well-executed information and knowledge management initiatives. He has provided solutions for some of the world's most recognizable brands, including Adobe, Corbis, Crate & Barrel, Disney, Group Health, IBM, Microsoft, Pearson Publishing, REI, and Sears.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Gary Carlson, and let's get into the presentation. Today, we're really going to be covering what it means to embrace data quality across your entire organization as a way of making sure that the data, that when you're collecting, storing, and managing data, all those activities are driving towards better data so you can make better decisions and act on your data better throughout everything. So we'll be talking about what it means to design that, what the metadata journey looks like, and different parts of this process, which include the information model, governance of the information, and the processes involved to support a full metadata data quality project. And one of the things we'll really be digging into is that this is a process and not an outcome. A lot of organizations we've seen have a data quality project where they want to go in and clean up this database or that system, and all that work is necessary, but unless we think about the whole process, they're just going to be back at it again. And that's really what we're trying to address here, is how do we do this in a way that's sustainable and maintainable over time. Just a quick note about Factor. It's the company I work with. We work with a lot of enterprise scale companies, really looking deeply into the way they store, manage, organize, and use their information across multiple systems, business units, workflows, customer touch points. All of those things require that the information be well managed, the quality be good, so that people can do things with that information. And this is really a distillation of what we've learned across multiple projects from some of the world's largest organizations. So what are all the things that are necessary to be an information-centric organization so that you're marketing out, so that you can market to different user profiles across channels, so that you can generate reports for line users who are, might be trying to update a particular campaign, all the way up to executives so they can see which campaigns are working best and how to spend their dollars now and in the future. And when we look at this, really there's the whole metadata journey itself. And it starts with the collection. When we collect the data itself, what are the interfaces that we need to look at? The interfaces that are involved. We need to look at the metadata that's being applied to content. When we're creating campaign IDs, we need to look at the sources of all the information that's being used to generate that ID. All of the things that are involved in collection. And we'll be digging into each of these a little bit more in a minute. After the data has been collected, it needs to be stored. And this is where a lot of people focus their data quality efforts on the data that's already been collected in these systems. But really, the value of the storage is to make this information usable and accessible in different places. But we will be looking at what are the roles of the data storage tools in driving this data quality as well. Another big part of the metadata journey is the integration. How do we take the information out of these systems and combine it into different experiences? We've run into very few organizations that are able to utilize only information from one system if they're trying to do a true enterprise marketing initiative. There's generally a system managing the email, systems managing the content, digital assets, social, analytics. All these different systems will be using information from each other to get a coherent view of what's going on in the organization and how the organizations want to interact with their end users, their customers. And so these integrations are an important part of the metadata journey because the metadata is going to be what allows organizations to find the information in these different systems and bring it together in different ways. And then another part of the metadata journey, certainly for data quality, that often is overlooked is the usage. If organizations don't understand how information is going to be used, it makes it very difficult to collect the right information to support those use cases. And this is directly related to data quality, because if you don't collect the right data, you end up having to do a lot of mixing and matching and munging and guessing to do the things that you want to do as an organization, to hit the type of targets you want to hit, to execute the type of marketing campaigns and tactics that you need. So understanding the usage and making sure the usage is tied to the collection is an essential part of generating data quality throughout an organization. Related to this, when we're doing analytics and we're thinking about using this marketing data, this all depends on many different parts, many different things. In order to get true good analytics data to help drive your marketing campaigns, you need to look at all the different systems, which we've mentioned, all the different workflows involved in supporting the data, supporting the experiences, supporting the analytics. And most importantly, is understanding the needs of the different business units, your internal stakeholders. Most folks are going to be focusing on the needs of marketing or sales when we work on these types of projects. But just important is the needs of finance, because that's ultimately where the money is coming and going to. IT, obviously they're supporting the systems that are involved. Depending on the organization, you might have manufacturing, merchandising, product management groups. So understanding the needs of these different groups, again, to make sure that they get data that they can use, is another essential part of a major project like this. So really, what we're trying to do here is answer this question. How trustworthy is the data to meet all these different needs so we can make decisions about it, make decisions based on the data, so that an organization can be truly data-centric and know that when they want to do a personalization project, that they will get the right data to the people who they're trying to personalize the information for. That when they're targeting a campaign to a certain demographic, that demographic's going to get the right information. That when they're generating reports for executives, that's the right information, so the executives can make real decisions based on that information. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to get to with this data quality. And everything we're doing here is in support of getting trustworthy data, trustworthy information that represents the needs of the organization. So when we look at trustworthy, obviously we've got to get it someplace. And if we're going to get it someplace, we have to start from where it is. And this is a diagram that we made with a customer recently, showing their whole marketing ecosystem. And as you can see here, everything in orange represents a different system. And everything in blue represents different taxonomies, metadata schemes, product models, all those types of things. And just by looking at this, you can see why it is that it would be extremely difficult for this organization to generate meaningful reports, to run a personalization project, to get a good email campaign out the door, to meet compliance needs if necessary. All of that is based on the fact, all of that is so difficult because when just looking at this, you can tell there's no way to get from here to there. The interesting thing here is that many of these systems had very good information in them, good quality information that met their needs, but because that information wasn't consistent with the other systems, it still made their situation very difficult. And that's one of the things we want to get across today, is that there's two very important parts of data quality in a large enterprise. One is the information in the individual systems good, and then two is the information across the systems consistent. Does it meet the needs of the whole organization and not just that individual system? So if you imagine if you have a content management system and an email marketing system, where the email system wants to get information from the content management system, if they're sharing a data structure as we can see here, that makes it much easier to get good information to the end users. But if they're not sharing common metadata definitions, if the quality across these systems, if the data quality across these systems isn't consistent, then all of a sudden it becomes very difficult to move forward. And that's really what we're trying to address. So what we're trying to do here is get from something that looks like this to something that looks like this, where in order to drive data quality across the different systems, we're coming up with a central model for your taxonomies, for your metadata, for your content, so that that can be used and exposed to all these different systems. So when we go to do the integrations, when we go to do the analytics, we're able to get the right information, get consistent information from across the systems as well as within the systems. And what we found is this process fundamentally depends on many things, but the two core things that we believe are most important and often overlooked are the roles of the information model and governance. And we're going to spend some time going into the needs, what both of these things are right now. So the information model, often we'll call it the information layer. It's really a system agnostic view of the information in your organization. And not just a report on the information, but it's also a system agnostic view of how your organization needs to describe its world, describe itself, describe its information. What do we mean by campaign? What do we mean by audience? What do we mean by market segment? What do we mean by our different channels? Those are all definitions and objects and items that belong to the organization. They don't necessarily belong to one particular system. And so this information layer is a way of abstracting these concepts outside of a system so that they can then be agreed upon by both the technical and the business teams. And then that model can then be pushed into the individual systems as a way of driving this consistency. We often think about this as the information layer really living between the technical layer and the experience layer. We've all been in projects where, oh, search is broken, or the content management system's not working, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. And the first thing we do is go and replace a technical system, a new search tool, a new content management system. And there may often be good reasons for that, but that's generally not the final solution, the final way of approaching something like this. Because if we don't have this information layer that also talks to the experience layer, it's very difficult for those systems to stay in sync. And a similar thing for the experience layer. Organizations often try and fix these problems by creating a new interface. Oh, we need a new website. We need a new microsite. We need a new experience just to do this because our current one won't do it. And again, those things might work for targeted scenarios, but if we don't have this common understanding of this information layer that allows experiences to draw on information from multiple systems and systems to describe information in such a way that it can be easily pulled up by these experiences, there's no way to really move forward. The company is constantly battling entropy when it tries to create new capabilities, new experiences, generate new analytics reports. So it's the information layer that allows the organization to take charge of this. And the components of this information layer are really, it's your product model, your location model, the attributes and metadata, taxonomies, ontologies, content models, and your governance rules. All those things that are necessary, all those things that are necessary to describe your information, and all those things that are the descriptions of your information. So that once those have been agreed upon, they can then be used in these different systems and these different interfaces. Imagine if you had one definitive list of content types, one definitive list of audiences and customer segments and industries that was modeled in and of itself and then pushed down to these different systems. Then when you created a new user interface or a new experience or a new channel, you could just go to this information line and say, oh, I can pick from these things. I can go to these systems and get the information that I need. And this, in our observation, is really how you start to drive this notion of data quality. So we've got this information layer. It's really made up of this information model. What does that look like? It's really where you define what are the different attributes, taxonomies, content classes, product models. How do we define all, this is where we describe all those things in a very real way with a level of detail so that the IT teams can know how to interact with them and the business teams know what the semantics are around them so that we can come to a full agreement as an organization as to what these things are, so that once we start pushing these attributes into these different systems, we'll get that level of consistency both within the systems and across them. This also is extremely helpful if an organization is onboarding new systems or going through an acquisition. Having this model outside of any particular system really makes it easy to incorporate these new systems, organizations, workflows, and those types of things. So what do we mean? What are we doing this for? What are the particulars of this? Who are we doing this for? And this gets into, we're starting to get into the part of the presentation where I want to talk about how do we get the amount, how do we know what we need to know in order to make the decisions of what should be in this information layer. So in this case, it's really important to understand what are all the systems and tools that need to store, manage, utilize this information. And who are all the people who need to interact with it? Not just your employees or vendors who are entering information into your systems, not just your customers who might need to interact with a new experience, who you want to target for personalization, but also the executives. How are they going to use the information that comes out of this? How are they going to use the analytics? Your designers, where do they go? How do they need to get to this information to support the designs that they're doing? Vendors is a really important one too. If you've got a merchant supply chain where you're getting information, you're getting product information from your suppliers, understanding what their information model is and so I can map it into yours is really important. So as we start to do our due diligence and what needs to be in this information layer, this is what we need to do. We need to look at all of these things. So how do we do this? What do we look at? So when we go into this, we really look at a number of things. We ask you to consider these as questions that you can ask as you're embarking on a project like this. Questions to ask yourself, we keep struggling with this data quality. We keep getting the wrong information. It keeps happening. Maybe answering one of these questions will help shine a light on why that happens. So the first question is, do you have the right breadth of stakeholder perspectives? If you're trying to understand how to target your end users, have you interviewed enough of them? Do you understand not just your highest value customers, but the second tier of customers? Do you understand the needs of your non-customers, but people who you still want to bring into the fold? Do you understand what the best practices are for designing and building this information layer? How do you design and build taxonomies? It's not that you need to be a slave to these best practices, but there's a lot of really good thinking in there, and following these best practices will often allow you to create something that's more likely to work in the long run. Because a lot of work has been done in figuring out what it means to build these taxonomies and metadata structures. As an organization, have you defined what are your design or user experience best practices are? Do people within the organization know how much information you want to include in a page? What type of information density you're looking for? How your users want to interact with this information, how they expect to interact with it. Do you have different user profiles who have different sets of expectations? The more you can understand those things, the better you can identify and then build this information layer. I'm sure we've all been here with the technical limitations. We've got these great ideas. We're going to build these great taxonomies or metadata fields. We're going to generate these reports. And then we go to implement this. And it turns out that one of the systems can't support any of the models that we've created. So really understanding these technical limitations is essential to make sure that we build something that not only meets our business needs, but can be implemented today. And when there's a gap between those business needs and what can be implemented, that gap can be articulated really well and then placed on a roadmap. I can't emphasize this one enough. The practical governance workflows. As an organization, you need to be really honest with yourselves as how much effort you're going to be able to put into governance and modeling. Because if you can't staff this role or this responsibility, you might create something that's going to work really well on day one and meets all your business needs. But unless you have the people or the expertise or the resources there to support this governance process that allows these models to evolve, you're just going to be in the same situation 6 months from now. So we often end up using the information from understanding what the governance needs are and the governance roles that you'll have available to yourself to help us scale this information model. Maybe we can't make something as complex as we need to because we just won't have the resources to support it. You also need to consider what's the time frame for this? Are you collecting information for something that's going to be gone 6 months from now? Or are you creating something that's collecting information that's going to need to persist over time and across systems? Answering these questions can really help understand what it means to scale something like this. So you put the right amount of effort into something that's going to last for a long time, and also the right amount of effort, and scale your effort for things that aren't going to exist 3 months from now. And this really helps with the data quality because you know where to put your efforts and where to put your energy when building something out. Understanding how this information, who's accountable? This is related to the governance, but who's accountable for the good data? Who's accountable for for the quality that we need for the organization? If no one's accountable for it, that should show some real red flags that this project might not be successful. Ultimately, there needs to be an executive who's going to say, I'm going to address this data quality, and this is what I'm going to do, and these are our guidelines. Because if there's no one accountable, you can still have really good grassroots efforts to try and make this work. And that might work within a system or a business unit. But once you start spanning systems or groups, it gets extremely difficult. So understanding this accountability is essential. And then what type of data validation do we need? Maybe we want to know the location of our stores, but it turns out we can't validate by latitude and longitude, and we just have to give a town, but we can't give an address. Or we need to validate names, but we don't have a good enough process for understanding what those names are. Same things with product information. So understanding the roles of data validation and what data needs to be validated is very important. And my argument here is that these are all the types of questions that you need to ask when you're running into data quality issues. And it might be that a number of these you're doing really well, but I think that if you go through this list of questions, you'll be able to find out sort of where are the key pain points for getting good information within your organization. Now, I've talked a fair amount about governance, and though when you talk about governance, it often comes across as being something that's going to be burdensome, it slows people down, it's really just a drag. But my argument is that it doesn't need to be a burden. Because good governance design allows you to create manageable workflows. If you know what needs to be changed and how, and you can get ahead of that, then you can create the appropriate workflows to support that. Good governance design also gets down to having well-defined roles and responsibilities. A lot of times, data quality efforts come from the fact that there is no one responsible for keeping track of how we use the data or how we collect it. But if we can have those roles in place, that can make it easier. And then when someone wants to collect new information, they don't have to start from scratch. They can go to this person and say, okay, how do we collect this? And all of a sudden, this process of getting good data or getting any data at all can become easier because the people in these roles that understand the governance can probably provide guidance and examples of how to get this information more easily. So you don't have to create something from scratch. Another great thing about taking the time to do the governance is you need to talk to people. You need to talk to a lot of people, find out what their needs are. And often that process of talking to them starts to build an understanding of what the organization needs from its information. And that's a great way to start getting buy-in from your stakeholders. Also, when the stakeholders see their needs reflected in the governance process, even if they have to give up some control in this process, it makes it a lot easier for them to buy in. So understanding what their needs are, using that opportunity to help educate them on what the governance process is about, and then making sure that their needs are met in the process and the data collection process is a really great way of getting this buy-in and having these governance processes really start to take a life of their own and become something that's comforting to people as opposed to something that's a barrier to them doing their work. So good governance in our mind, equals better confidence in the information. It will provide transparency. It can often speed up processes, but more likely it can speed up the processes, but just as importantly, it's going to help processes, workflows, and systems and integrations stay healthy, not get broken. And I think that's one of the essential ways that governance supports this data quality, and governance starts to build confidence in your information so that you can start to build new capabilities. So what we're really trying to get to is that this data quality is a process. You need to collect information. The first part of this process is collecting it. And maybe we're collecting it across multiple sources, across different processes from different stakeholders. That's all fine, but if we're really clear about what we're collecting and why, and we use this as a moment to reflect on whether or not we're getting the right information from the right people, or we're getting it from all the people we need to get it from, or all the sources, that can be really helpful. Think about all the times we've read about in the news where an organization has done some major initiative, but they didn't talk to the right people, and all of a sudden they've got some really embarrassing social media incident happening where they've misnamed a product in such a way that it's offensive, or they didn't take into account some major use cases, and all of a sudden a product's fallen flat. This is where understanding all those stakeholders and making sure they're represented in this process is really important. And we can measure this by the accuracy and consistency along with the usefulness of the data once it's in the systems. Storage is another important part of this process. It's one thing to collect it and get it into these systems, but a big part of the storage is making sure that it's modeled in such a way so that it can be scalable, so that it meets standards, and it's optimized for different types of retrieval. So if there's APIs available, there's and other interfaces so that it's readily accessible. One of the things that's really important is if we understand what the information needs to do, it needs to be modeled in these systems to support that. I've run into projects where all the information's actually been in the systems, but it's stored in such a way that it's almost impossible to get it at the scale that it needs to get to. It's just, it's something stored in a blob instead of a text field, something stored in a text field instead of a date field. Those types of things, or it's not modeled in such a way that you can do 100 queries a minute against the database. Those types of things. So really understanding how to store this information is an important part of the process. And again, we can measure this in different ways. Once we've got it in the system, in any large enterprise these days, it's likely that we're going to need to be able to get information from multiple systems to do a certain task, or to generate a certain analytics report, or to support personalization, or any of these major marketing and engagements we need to do. So understanding the integration process, making sure that the integration is able to get the information from these different systems while still maintaining the fidelity of the information. And again, we can measure this mostly by the ease and reuse of the information. If someone says, if someone in the marketing department says, hey, we want to run a new campaign and we need this information, this type of information sent to these audiences and these geos, if we can do this easily, we've probably got the integration, we've probably got it modeled in the storage well, and the integrations are set up such that we can easily get these things. This is a great way to measure it. And in some ways, if you're starting a project like this, understanding the usage is really one of the best places to start. What are the different interfaces where this information needs to end up? What type of decisions do executives need to make? What type of reports do we need to send to the different business units? Are there reports we need to send for compliance reasons or legal reasons? What are the workflows that are necessary to support with this type of information? As we start to understand this usage, we can move back through this process and make sure we get the information we need. Because we could have collected information well, we could have stored it well, we can make sure the integrations work. But if we don't understand how it's going to be used, or we're not meeting these needs of how it should be used, then we don't have good data. And all of a sudden people are going to start working around these systems, or we're going to have all these hacks, or we're going to start to mix and match the data to try and answer the questions we want to answer. So in some ways, this is sort of the end of the process because we're using it, but when we're designing something, it's really where we need to start. And again, if we can use the data, we can get it quickly, and it's accurate, and it's allowing people to do the things they want to do with it, that's a sign that we've got a good process here. So I'm going to quickly go through a few of the components here. When we're collecting information, ultimately it's to get it into these systems. So we need to understand what are the capabilities of these systems. We don't want to collect data that's difficult to store in these systems. Or we don't want to collect data that might already exist in the system. So we need to understand what's there and how these systems are going to interact with the data. We also need to understand the people. How are they going to interact? How are we going to actually get this information from people, if in fact we're getting this information from people? How are we going to, do they have the expertise necessary? Do they have the training? Do they have an interface that works in their existing workflow? If we're providing people with horrible interfaces that are very inefficient, we're going to get really bad data because people are in a hurry. They've got things to do. And if we make it difficult for them to give us good information, we're not going to get good information. So one of the places it starts to come together is really in the user experience. What is the experience we're giving to people to collect this information? And so these are some screenshots from the Claravine product that really show if you can create a way to make it easy for people to give you the information and have this work within their workflows, it's going to be a lot easier to get this information into the storage areas. A lot of these enterprise systems have really horrible interfaces or very difficult ones to use, or interfaces that are really geared for someone who's had a lot of training. But if you can abstract that collection process or make a process that's able to very easily create those campaign IDs or other marketing assets you need, that's going to be a really good way of getting that information. And again, this is just another place where you can expose that information model. If your tagging interfaces are directly tied to your information model, and all of a sudden you're driving this level of consistency and validation in at the beginning of the process. So once we've collected the information, we've got to put it in these systems. And it's imperative that the systems are able to represent the information model. They might not represent it literally, but at the end of the day, they need, at the interface, it needs to be able to say, I'm going to take in a title, audience ID, industry ID, industry name, product name. And it's going to come into the system, and I'm going to pass it out of the system in the same format. So we've got that lossless process there. When information can come in, it can come out in the ways we need it to come out. So integration is really where this all comes together. A lot of it comes together. As we can see, if we've got this information model, which is the part in orange here, that's being used to feed your DAM system, your content management system, your analytics system, if it's being used to feed the values that are going into your tagging interface like Claravine, all of a sudden we're starting to get this virtuous cycle here where things are just getting easier. So let's go through this a little more detail. If we've got a taxonomy management system, some sort of tool to manage this centrally, we can push the taxonomy definitions, the content types, the campaign ID codes, push all of that stuff to a tagging system. That can then go and either through a manual process or directly into your asset management systems. And again, if they're getting the definitions from the central location, all of a sudden we've got this really great level of consistency, not just within the systems, but across them. And then again, if this all goes through, we get the analytics data, and we're able to feed new insights or ideas back into this model if we need to. But this is all a way of driving consistency, data quality, and trust in your system by creating this information model or information layer that's supporting all your key processes. We're getting back to the usage of it, which we've talked about before. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you know what reports need to be generated, if you know what type of marketing analytics you need, what actions need to be taken on this information, where an organization wants to go in terms of personalization, omni-channel exercises, product expansion, any of those things, once you know how it's going to be used, then you can just start to design backwards so that you don't have to guess what good data quality will mean at the end. You'll know what good data quality means, and you can build that knowledge in through the integrations, the systems, and the collection process. So I think in conclusion, really what I wanted to get across here is that there's a lot that goes into this. And one of the ways to be successful is to view data quality as a process, as an enterprise initiative, as opposed to a point solution. Now, that's not to say that there's not plenty of places where you need to go and clean up the data in a system, and that's going to be an individual project. But unless you view that in the context of an end-to-end process that requires people and technology and workflows and executive commitment, you're going to be back where you start within 3 months, 6 months, 1 month, a year, whatever. But it really depends on approaching this as a center of excellence, a process, something that the organization really needs to commit to. All right, so thank you. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks so much for watching this presentation. Join us on the Analytics Nexus Slack to talk with our presenters about this topic and more.